In the gleaming lobby of a Los Angeles skyscraper, a wealthy CEO mocks a 60-year-old cleaning woman staring at his $3.2 million Ferrari. "If you can start it, it's yours," he laughs, surrounded by executives joining in his cruel joke. But when she sits behind the wheel and the engine roars to life, a message appears on the dashboard. DNA recognition, valid user. How could a humble cleaner share DNA with one of America's most powerful men? For 42 years, Margaret Wilson has cleaned other people's offices while searching for her son, who vanished at a county fair in 1983. Now, a chance encounter and a humiliating bet reveal a shocking truth that will unravel decades of carefully constructed lies, expose a crime that destroyed 2 lives, and prove that a mother's love never dies, even when the world has forgotten her name. If you enjoyed this emotional story of loss, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child, please follow our channel for more unforgettable stories that will touch your heart. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even after decades of darkness, hope can still find its way home. The Thursday afternoon sun cast long shadows through the glass facade of Dunham Industries headquarters, creating a kaleidoscope of light that danced across the polished marble floor of the lobby. Outside, Los Angeles traffic crawled under a hazy sky, the air thick with smog and unfulfilled promises. Margaret Wilson, 60 years old with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much disappointment, quietly pushed her cleaning cart toward the service elevator. Her navy uniform hung loose on her thin frame, a name tag pinned slightly crooked above her heart. She'd been invisible in this building for nearly 7 years. Just another essential worker that executives looked through rather than at. As she passed the main entrance, a commotion drew her attention. A crowd had gathered, young executives in tailored suits and designer dresses, their laughter tinkling like expensive crystal. At the center stood Charles Dunham, the 42-year-old CEO whose face graced the cover of last month's Fortune magazine. "And then," Charles was saying, his voice carrying across the lobby, "he tried to tell me his company was worth $50 million. The crowd erupted in laughter, as practiced and polished as their shoes. That's when Margaret saw it, a gleaming Ferrari F8 Tributo, red as a fresh wound, being valeted into the private section of the garage visible through the glass walls. The supercar purred into its reserved spot, the engine note fading like a satisfied sigh. Margaret paused. Something about the car made her heart skip a beat. Without thinking, she stepped closer to the glass, her cleaning cart forgotten behind her. "It's the new custom model," someone whispered. "There are only 5 in the entire country." Margaret's eyes traced the curves of the vehicle with an almost maternal tenderness. Her fingertips touched the glass unconsciously, leaving a small smudge she would later have to clean. Charles noticed her staring. His conversation halted mid-sentence as a smirk spread across his face. He was known for his entertaining interactions with staff, moments that became legendary stories at happy hours across the financial district. "Admiring my new toy?" Charles called out, his voice dripping with condescension. The lobby fell silent. Margaret realized everyone was looking at her, the invisible woman suddenly uncomfortably visible. I'm sorry, Mr. Dunham," she stammered, reaching for her cart. "It's a beautiful car." Charles strode across the lobby, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble. The crowd followed, sensing entertainment. He positioned himself between Margaret and the service elevator, her escape route blocked. "Do you know how much that car costs?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Margaret shook her head, eyes downcast. "More than you'll earn in 20 lifetimes," he said, triggering nervous laughter from his audience. $3.2 million custom built. The engine alone costs more than your house, I'd wager." Margaret nodded, trying to become invisible again. "Yes, sir. I should get back to." "Curious about how it feels to drive?" Charles interrupted, dangling his key fob between his fingers. The small crowd of executives tightened around them, smartphones appearing to capture whatever was coming next. "No, sir, Tell you what," Charles announced, his voice echoing off the marble and glass. "I'm feeling generous today." He glanced back at his employees, ensuring they were appreciating his performance. If you can start it, it's yours." The laughter that followed was like a storm of shame raining down on Margaret's hunched shoulders. "Go on," Charles pressed, extending the key fob toward her. "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for someone like you." Margaret looked up, something flickering in her eyes that Charles couldn't quite interpret. Was it hurt, anger, or something else entirely? "I really should get back to work, Mr. Dunham," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," he insisted, grabbing her weathered hand and placing the fob in her palm. "I insist. Unless you're afraid?" His eyebrows raised in challenge. A hush fell over the lobby as Margaret's fingers closed around the key fob. Her eyes met Charles's for the first time, really met them, and something passed between them, quick as lightning. "Very well," she said, her voice suddenly steady. The crowd parted as Margaret walked toward the garage door, Charles and his entourage following closely behind. Security guards exchanged confused glances but didn't intervene, not when the CEO himself was leading the procession. Margaret approached the Ferrari with unexpected grace. Something in her posture had changed, a straightening of her spine, a lifting of her chin. Without hesitation, she pressed the handle. To everyone's surprise, the door unlocked. "That's just proximity," Charles explained to the murmuring crowd. "The key is in her hand. The real challenge is starting it." Margaret slid into the driver's seat as if she belonged there. The leather embraced her like an old friend. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning chemicals, hovered over the dashboard for a moment. Charles leaned against the doorframe, his smile widening. "Go ahead. Try. I could use a good laugh before my dinner meeting." Margaret's right hand moved to the steering column, then paused. Her brow furrowed slightly as if listening to a distant voice. Then, with movements that seemed both foreign and familiar to her, she pressed 2 buttons on the console in sequence, adjusted the seat forward, and placed her thumb against a small scanner beside the ignition. The dashboard lit up with an unexpected message. "DNA recognition, valid user." Before anyone could process what was happening, Margaret turned the key. The Ferrari's engine roared to life, not just a start, but a perfect, well-tuned growl that spoke of precision engineering and flawless execution. Charles's smug expression shattered. His face drained of color as he stared at the dashboard message that couldn't be there. "That's impossible," he whispered. The security system of his custom Ferrari was programmed to his genetic signature alone. No one else could start it without his authorization, not even the dealers or mechanics. It was a security feature he'd paid an extra $500,000 for, a biometric lock tied to his DNA. Yet there sat Margaret, the cleaning lady, with the engine purring in response to her touch. "How did you—" Charles began, his voice cracking. Margaret looked as shocked as everyone else. "I don't know," she said, her hands trembling on the wheel. "It just felt right somehow." In the absolute silence that followed, the car's infotainment system illuminated with another message that sent a chill through Charles's body. "Welcome back, authorized familial user." The crowd of executives, moments ago laughing, now stood in stunned silence. In the reflection of the garage's glass walls, Charles could see his own ashen face staring back at him, alongside a woman who had just upended his carefully controlled world with the simple turn of a key. Who was she? And why did his car, programmed to recognize only his DNA, respond to her as family? The silence in the glass garage of Dunham Industries headquarters felt physical, like a barrier pressing against everyone's skin. For 15 excruciating seconds, nobody moved. The Ferrari's engine continued to purr contentedly, as if it had been waiting for Margaret's touch all along. Charles Dunham's face cycled through expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. His expensive cologne couldn't mask the sudden acrid scent of fear-tinged sweat that emanated from him. The crowd of executives, moments ago a unified chorus of mockery, now shifted uncomfortably, suddenly conscious of witnessing something they weren't meant to see. "Get out of my car," Charles finally said, his voice low and dangerous. The friendly showman demeanor had evaporated like morning dew on hot asphalt. Margaret sat frozen, her wrinkled hand still gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The dashboard display continued to glow with the damning message. Recognition, DNA valid. "I said get out," Charles shouted, grabbing Margaret's arm and yanking her from the driver's seat with enough force to make her stumble. She fell to her knees on the polished concrete, her uniform skirt catching beneath her. A young woman from accounting gasped. A senior vice president took 2 steps backward. "Someone call security," Charles demanded, his voice echoing through the garage. "This woman has tampered with my property." Margaret slowly rose to her feet, smoothing her uniform with dignity that seemed incongruous with her surroundings. "I didn't tamper with anything, Mr. Dunham," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You asked me to start the car, and I did." "That's impossible," Charles hissed, now speaking only to Margaret, though everyone strained to hear. "This car uses proprietary biometric security. It only responds to my DNA." Something flickered in Margaret's eyes, understanding perhaps, or a question forming. "I don't know what happened," she said quietly. I felt like I knew what to do. My hands just moved on their own." Charles pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, fingers trembling slightly as he dialed. "This is Dunham. I need security in the executive garage immediately, and call LAPD. I want someone arrested for corporate espionage." The crowd began to disperse, uncomfortable with the ugly turn of events. A joke at a cleaner's expense was one thing. Witnessing their CEO's public meltdown was quite another. Margaret stood her ground, clutching her small purse to her chest like armor. "Mr. Dunham, please, I don't understand what's happening either." 2 security guards hurried into the garage, followed closely by Ryan Chen, the company's chief systems engineer, a slender man with rectangular glasses who had designed many of the custom features in Charles's car. "What's going on?" Ryan asked, eyes darting between Charles, Margaret, and the still-running Ferrari. This cleaning woman somehow bypassed the security in my car," Charles sputtered, pointing accusingly at Margaret. "I want her detained until police arrive." Ryan frowned, approaching the vehicle cautiously. He slid into the driver's seat and examined the dashboard display. His eyebrows shot up above his glasses frames. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "What? What doesn't make sense?" Charles demanded. Ryan turned to Margaret with newfound curiosity. "Ma'am, have you ever seen this car before today?" "No, sir," Margaret replied. "I've only seen it in magazines." "Charles," Ryan said, his voice suddenly hushed as he climbed out of the car. "We need to talk." He grabbed the CEO's elbow and led him several paces away, speaking urgently into his ear. "The system is working perfectly. It hasn't been hacked or bypassed. The car genuinely recognized her biometric signature as a familial match to yours." Charles's face drained of color. That's not possible." "The programming is explicit," Ryan insisted. "The genetic recognition system you paid extra for, it doesn't just verify your DNA. It's designed to recognize hierarchical genetic relationships, your bloodline, parents, children, siblings. It's a security feature you specifically requested. Remember? For future family access?" Charles stared at Margaret, who stood with her head bowed, an incongruous figure in her faded uniform amid the luxury and gleaming technology. "Cancel the police," he muttered to the security guards, who exchanged confused glances. "Everyone back to work. Now." The remaining onlookers reluctantly dispersed, though whispers had already begun circulating. Charles approached Margaret, his composure partially restored, but his eyes betraying inner turmoil. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice had lost its edge. "What kind of game are you playing?" Margaret shook her head, gray wisps of hair escaping her practical bun. "I'm nobody, Mr. Dunham. Just a cleaning woman trying to make it to retirement. I've worked here for 7 years. Before that, I worked at Memorial Hospital for 12 years. Before that..." "I don't need your resume," Charles snapped. "I need to know why my car thinks you're related to me." Margaret's weathered face registered genuine confusion. "I don't know," she whispered. "I honestly don't know." Ryan cleared his throat. Sir, perhaps we should conduct proper testing. If there's some kind of genetic similarity causing a false positive. This doesn't leave this garage, Charles interrupted sharply. Is that understood? Not a word to anyone. Both Ryan and Margaret nodded. Charles ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it slightly. Ms. Wilson. Margaret Wilson. Ms. Wilson, you're dismissed for the day. With pay, he added stiffly. Report to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Margaret nodded again, clutching her purse tighter. Yes, sir. As she turned to leave, Charles called after her. And Ms. Wilson? Not a word of this to anyone. Of course, Mr. Dunham. The elevator doors closed on Margaret's expressionless face, leaving Charles and Ryan alone in the garage with the still-running Ferrari. Shut it off, Charles muttered. Ryan complied, leaving the garage in unnatural silence. This isn't possible, Charles said, more to himself than to Ryan. Run diagnostics. Check everything. There has to be a glitch. I'll do that, sir, Ryan promised. But the system is designed to be foolproof. If it recognized her as family. She's not family, Charles insisted. I was adopted as an infant. My birth parents are dead. I have no siblings, no children. There's no possibility of a familial connection to a cleaning woman. Ryan nodded, though his expression remained doubtful. I'll run a full system check. After Ryan left, Charles stood alone in the garage, staring at his reflection in the Ferrari's gleaming red surface. For a brief moment, his perfectly constructed world felt like it was built on shifting sand. Across town, in a modest apartment in Reseda, Margaret Wilson sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling as she unlocked the bottom drawer of her nightstand. From beneath a stack of old photographs, she withdrew a tarnished silver locket. She clicked it open to reveal the faded image of a smiling 4-year-old boy with dark curls and deep-set eyes. Anthony, she whispered, her voice breaking on the name she hadn't spoken aloud in decades. On her small kitchen table lay her employee badge for Dunham Industries, the photo showing her tired face next to the name Margaret Wilson. Beside it sat another ID, this one much older and worn around the edges. It bore a younger version of her face and a different name, Margaret Whitman, the mother of Anthony Whitman, missing since 1983. In the stillness of her apartment, a notification chimed on the company-issued tablet that cleaning staff used to record their completed tasks. A new message from the engineering department. All cleaning staff. Temporary security protocol change. Report directly to HR for new badge processing tomorrow. Margaret closed the locket with a soft click and wiped a tear from her weathered cheek. The August heat shimmered off the pavement of the San Fernando Valley Community Fair in the summer of 1983. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every possible surface, celebrating both summer and lingering patriotic fervor. The air smelled of cotton candy, hot dogs, and the distinctive scent of sun-warmed plastic from the rented inflatable attractions dotting the fairground. Margaret Whitman, then a vibrant 28-year-old single mother with chestnut hair pulled back in a ponytail, clutched the small hand of her 4-year-old son, Anthony. His dark curls bounced as he pulled eagerly toward a carousel with hand-painted horses gleaming in the California sun. "Mommy, look! Blue horse!" Anthony pointed, his excitement making him bounce on his toes, the Velcro straps of his tiny sneakers making that distinctive ripping sound each time he jumped. "I see it, sweetheart." Margaret laughed, her voice lighter than unburdened by the decades of grief that would follow. "That can be your special horse." She bent down to his level, straightening the collar of his Pac-Man t-shirt. "Remember what we practiced? If you get lost, you..." Anthony's face grew serious, reciting their safety plan with pride. "Find a mommy with kids, or a person in uniform. Tell them my name is Anthony Whitman and my mommy is Margaret." "And what's my phone number?" Margaret prompted. Anthony recited the digits perfectly, earning a kiss on his forehead that made him giggle and wipe it away dramatically. "That's my smart boy," Margaret said, her heart swelling with that singular love only a parent knows, fierce, protective, and all-consuming. "Now let's go see that blue horse." They joined the line for the carousel, Anthony chattering about how he would pretend to be a cowboy. Margaret fished in her purse for ride tickets when she realized she'd left their small cooler of sandwiches and juice boxes by the picnic tables. "Honey, stay right here in line. Mommy needs to run back to get our lunch. See? It's right there." She pointed to the red cooler visible just 30 yards away. "Don't move from this spot, okay?" "Okay, Mommy." Anthony nodded solemnly, his small fingers clutching the metal railing of the carousel queue. Margaret hurried to retrieve the cooler, glancing back every few seconds to see Anthony's dark curls and bright blue shirt in the line. A group of teenagers with teased hair and neon accessories moved into line behind him, momentarily blocking her view. She grabbed the cooler and hurried back. But when she returned, the space where Anthony had stood was empty. "Anthony?" she called, looking around frantically. "Anthony?" The teenagers looked at her blankly. "The little kid? He was just here a second ago," one girl with a side ponytail offered. Margaret's heart began to pound. She pushed through the line, scanning the area around the carousel. "Anthony! Anthony!" The next 45 minutes dissolved into a nightmare of increasingly desperate searching. Fare security was alerted. Announcements blared over the loudspeakers. "We have a lost child. Anthony Whitman, age 4, wearing a blue Pac-Man shirt and red shorts." By sunset, local police had joined the search. The fairgrounds were combed inch by inch. Nothing. "Someone must have taken him," Margaret insisted to the stone-faced detective who interviewed her in a makeshift command center by the fairground entrance. "He wouldn't just wander off, he knew to stay put." "Mrs. Whitman." "Ms." Margaret corrected automatically. "Ms. Whitman, we're doing everything we can. Most children are found within the first few hours. He's probably just wandered to another attraction." But Anthony wasn't found that day, or the next. Missing person flyers with his smiling face appeared on telephone poles and store windows across the valley. News stations ran brief segments. A search team combed nearby wooded areas. And slowly, as days turned to weeks, the urgency faded for everyone except Margaret. "We're keeping the case open," Detective Sandra Rodriguez assured her during their last official meeting, her kind eyes betraying the pity she felt. "But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that—" "Don't," Margaret cut her off. "Don't you dare tell me to give up on my son." Now, 42 years later, Margaret sat in the same detective's living room in Burbank. Sandra Rodriguez, long retired from the LAPD, had maintained a friendship with Margaret born from shared grief and determination. Sandra's hair had gone from black to silver, her once athletic frame now softened with age, but her eyes remained sharp and observant. "I swear it's him, Sandra," Margaret said, clutching a mug of tea that had gone cold. "The way the car recognized me. It has to be Anthony." Sandra studied the printed employee profile Margaret had brought. Charles Dunham, 46, CEO of Dunham Industries. His sharp features and cold eyes stared back from the glossy corporate headshot. "You really think this man is your Anthony?" Sandra asked gently. "Look at his eyes," Margaret insisted. "They're exactly like his father's. And the age is right. Anthony would be 46 now." Sandra sighed, placing the photo on her coffee table. "Margaret, you've thought you found him before. Remember that graduate student at UCLA? And the waiter at the seafood restaurant? This is different," Margaret insisted. "The car recognized my DNA. The engineer said it was programmed for familial connections." Sandra reached for a worn leather folder on her bookshelf, the personal copy of Anthony's case file she'd kept after retirement. She flipped through pages of yellowed notes and reports until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pulling out a newspaper clipping Margaret had never seen. "I never showed you this because it didn't lead anywhere." The small article from a local paper, dated 3 days after Anthony's disappearance, read, "Child resembling missing boy spotted in luxury vehicle. Witness report seeing child matching description of Anthony Whitman in silver Mercedes leaving Valley area with blonde woman. Police investigating." Margaret's hands trembled as she took the clipping. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" "The lead went nowhere," Sandra explained. "The witness couldn't remember the license plate. just that it was an expensive silver car with a blonde woman driving. We questioned every blonde woman with a Mercedes in a 50-mile radius. Nothing stuck. Margaret stared at the grainy newsprint, 42-year-old possibilities reawakening in her mind. Blonde woman. Charles Dunham was raised by Elaine Dunham, the founder of West Coast Financial. She was blonde, always in the society pages. Sandra's expression softened with concern. Margaret, that's a stretch. There must be thousands of... She died last year, Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. It was in the company newsletter. Charles Dunham mourns the passing of his mother, Elaine. And here's the thing, there were no children at the funeral. No siblings for Charles. Just business associates. That doesn't mean... I need to know, Sandra. Margaret clutched the article to her chest. After all these years, don't I deserve to know? Sandra studied her friend's face, the lines etched by decades of waiting, the hope that had never fully died despite the crushing weight of probability. She reached for her laptop. Let me see what I can find about Elaine Dunham's history, she said, fingers typing rapidly despite her arthritis. If she suddenly appeared with a child around 1983? Minutes ticked by as Sandra navigated through public records databases she still had access to, through retired detective forums. Here's something, she finally said. Elaine Dunham, previously Elaine Crowley, filed adoption papers in November 1983, 3 months after Anthony disappeared. Margaret's breath caught. For a boy? Sandra nodded slowly. For a 4-year-old boy. The records are sealed, but the timeline... Margaret stared at the photo of Charles Dunham, his hard eyes so different from the laughing child she'd lost, yet hauntingly familiar in their shape and depth. She traced his features with a trembling finger. It's him, she whispered, certainty flooding her voice. Charles is my Anthony. Sandra didn't argue this time. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed Margaret's hand. What will you do? She asked quietly. Margaret looked up, decades of grief crystallizing into determination. Tomorrow I have a meeting with him. His assistant called to confirm it an hour ago. In the fading light of Sandra's living room, Margaret held the photo of the man who might be her long-lost son and whispered, I've found you. Charles Dunham paced the length of his penthouse apartment, the lights of Los Angeles glittering 40 stories below like fallen stars. His Armani tie hung loosely around his neck, and a half-empty glass of 30-year-old Macallan sat abandoned on his marble counter. Sleep had evaded him all night, chased away by the haunting image of a cleaning woman starting his car with her DNA. He paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. His reflection stared back, a successful man by every measurable standard. Yet, for the first time in years, Charles felt the foundations of his carefully constructed life shifting beneath his feet. Who is she? He whispered to the empty room. His phone chimed with a text from Vanessa Pierce, his executive assistant for the past 5 years. She was the only person who would dare contact him at this hour. Background check on Monsieur Wilson complete. Basic results attached. Nothing unusual except multiple name changes. Birth name, Margaret Whitman. More comprehensive search underway. Charles frowned. The name Whitman meant nothing to him. Neither did Wilson. He had no memories before his 4th birthday, a common phenomenon his adoptive mother had always assured him. Early childhood amnesia, she called it. An explanation for the nightmares that had plagued him through his youth, fragments of a carousel, a blue horse, and a woman's voice calling a name that wasn't his. Across town, in the modest executive suite of Dunham Industries, Vanessa Pierce was conducting an unauthorized investigation of her own. At 32, with a pristine Yale MBA and ruthless ambition, she had attached herself to Charles's rising star with unwavering devotion that transcended professional boundaries. Her feelings for him remained unrequited, but undeterred. The quiet of the empty office suite was broken only by the soft clicking of her keyboard and the occasional sipping of her 4th espresso. Security cameras had been temporarily disabled, a trick she'd learned from the IT department during a brief strategic flirtation. "What are you hiding, Margaret Wilson?" she murmured, scrolling through employment records. Something about the cleaning woman's sudden significance to Charles disturbed her deeply. She'd watched from a distance as the incident with the Ferrari unfolded, noting the uncharacteristic panic in Charles's normally controlled demeanor. Vanessa's search had yielded little until she remembered the private safe in Charles's office, the one he thought nobody knew about. Located behind a reproduction Rothko painting, the combination was Charles's mother's birthday. Vanessa had discovered it years ago while searching for financial documents during a particularly stressful acquisition. The safe door swung open silently, revealing several leather-bound albums embossed with the Dunham family crest, a hawk grasping a key in its talons. Vanessa had never dared to examine them before, but tonight's urgency overrode her usual caution. She lifted the oldest album, its leather crackling slightly as she opened it on Charles's desk. The first pages contained formal portraits of Elaine Dunham in various society settings. Then came Charles's childhood photos, professional portraits showing a solemn boy in expensive clothing, his smile never reaching his eyes. Vanessa flipped through the pages, pausing when she noticed something odd. Between pages 15 and 17, the binding was stretched as if page 16 had been forcibly removed. She examined the album more carefully and found 3 more instances of missing pages, surgical excisions from the family history. Near the middle of the album, a photo slipped from between the pages. It showed a much younger Charles, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, sitting on the lap of a woman who was definitely not Elaine Dunham. This woman had warm eyes and a gentle smile, her arm wrapped protectively around the boy. The background appeared to be a modest apartment, nothing like the Dunham mansion in Bel Air. Vanessa turned the photo over. Written in faded blue ink was a simple message. For Anthony with love eternal. Mommy. Anthony, not Charles. Vanessa's heart raced as she carefully photographed the evidence with her phone before returning everything to its exact position in the safe. The implications were staggering and potentially useful. Meanwhile, in her small Reseda apartment, Margaret prepared for the most important meeting of her life. She laid out her only non-uniform outfit on the bed, a navy blue dress she'd purchased years ago for a cousin's funeral, slightly outdated but dignified. Her hands shook as she ironed it with painstaking care. On her dresser sat the few precious items she had kept from Anthony's short life. A baby tooth in a tiny ceramic box, a crayon drawing of what might be a horse or a dog, the silver locket containing his photo, and a small, worn stuffed rabbit named Marvin, missing one ear and most of its original stuffing. Margaret picked up the rabbit, its once white fur now gray with age. "We might have found him, Marvin," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pressed the threadbare toy to her chest, remembering how Anthony had refused to sleep without it, how he'd cried when the rabbit's ear had torn off at the laundromat. The memory hit her with such force that she had to sit down, Anthony wailing as the ear disappeared into the spinning drum of the industrial washing machine. Margaret frantically trying to stop the cycle, a kind stranger offering to buy him a new toy, Anthony refusing, inconsolable. "Marvin needs his ear to hear me," he had sobbed. "How will he hear my secrets?" Margaret had sewn a crude replacement ear that night from an old sock. Anthony had accepted it with solemn gravity, declaring, "He's still Marvin, just different now." The morning found Margaret walking through the imposing lobby of Dunham Industries with her head held high despite her thundering heart. She wore her navy dress with a cardigan that concealed its outdated cut, and sensible shoes polished to a modest shine. In her purse, wrapped in a handkerchief, was Marvin the rabbit, a talisman of courage she couldn't leave behind. The receptionist eyed her with poorly concealed curiosity. By now, rumors of yesterday's incident had undoubtedly spread throughout the company. "Mr. Dunham is expecting you," the young woman said, her tone suggesting this was highly unusual. "Ms. Pierce will take you up." Vanessa Pierce appeared from the elevator bank, her Louboutins clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Her cream-colored suit probably cost more than Margaret's annual salary, and her smile contained all the warmth of an Arctic winter. "Mrs. Wilson," she nodded curtly, deliberately using the wrong title. "Follow me." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent and tense. Vanessa's perfume, something expensive with notes of jasmine, filled the small space, making Margaret increasingly aware of her own discount store body lotion. "Mr. Dunham is very busy today," Vanessa said as the doors opened. "Keep this brief." Margaret nodded, clutching her purse tighter. The executive floor was a different world from the service areas she usually cleaned. All glass, chrome, and abstract art, worth more than her entire apartment building. Charles's office door was open. He stood at the window, his back to the entrance, a silhouette of power against the panoramic view of Los Angeles. "Sir," Vanessa announced, "Margaret Wilson is here." Charles turned, his face unreadable. "Thank you, Vanessa. That will be all." A flash of displeasure crossed Vanessa's features before she smoothed it away with practiced ease. "Of course. I'll be right outside if you need anything." The door closed, leaving Margaret standing awkwardly by the entrance, her purse clutched to her chest like armor. Charles gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Margaret perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, her weathered hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions. Finally, Charles spoke. "I had you investigated." His voice was cold, controlled. "Your name wasn't always Wilson?" Margaret met his gaze steadily. "No, sir. It was Whitman. I changed it after my divorce back to my maiden name, and then to Wilson after my second marriage." Charles nodded, making a note on a leather-bound pad. "And you've worked as a cleaner for most of your life?" "Yes," Margaret answered. "It was reliable work, flexible hours. I needed that while I was searching." "Searching?" Charles raised an eyebrow. Margaret took a deep breath. "For my son. He was taken from me in 1983, at a community fair." Something flickered in Charles's eyes. Discomfort? Recognition? It was gone before Margaret could identify it. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said mechanically. "But I fail to see how this connects to yesterday's incident with my car." Margaret's fingers tightened around her purse strap. "Mr. Dunham, how old are you?" 46, he replied, irritation creeping into his voice. "Ms. Wilson, I don't appreciate—" "The name of the Coelhinho de Pelucia was Marvin," Margaret interrupted softly in Portuguese, the language she'd often used with Anthony because of his Brazilian father. "You lost him no carousel azul." Charles froze, his face draining of color. "What did you say?" Margaret switched back to English. "Your stuffed rabbit. His name was Marvin. You lost him on the blue carousel." Charles Dunham stumbled backward as if physically struck, the perfect posture of corporate power momentarily abandoned. His hand gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles blanched white against his tanned skin. "How could you possibly know that?" he whispered, voice stripped of its usual authority. The plush office, with its carefully curated modern art and panoramic view of Los Angeles, suddenly felt claustrophobic. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as Charles stared at the aging cleaning woman sitting across from him, a woman who had just spoken words that connected to fragments of dreams he'd spent decades trying to forget. Margaret reached into her purse with trembling fingers and carefully withdrew a small, worn stuffed rabbit. One ear was original, the other clearly a replacement made from different material, clumsily sewn on with thick thread that had faded to a different shade of white than the original stitching. "His ear got torn off at the laundromat," she said softly, placing Marvin on the desk between them. "You cried for hours. Said he wouldn't be able to hear your secrets anymore." Charles stared at the stuffed animal as if it were a bomb about to detonate. A bead of sweat formed at his temple despite the perfectly regulated climate of the office. His breathing became shallow, audible in the silence. "I don't—" he started, then swallowed hard. "This proves nothing. Anyone could have—" "You had a birthmark," Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. "On your left shoulder blade, shaped like a half moon. When you were 3, you told everyone it was where an angel had kissed you." Charles's hand unconsciously moved toward his shoulder, touching the spot through his expensive suit jacket before he caught himself and forced his arm back down. "Who put you up to this?" he demanded. But the question lacked conviction. "What do you want? Money?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "I've been looking for my son for 42 years, Mr. Dunham. All I want is the truth." Outside the office, Vanessa Pierce had positioned herself strategically near the door, appearing to organize files while straining to hear the conversation within. The look of territorial concern on her face deepened with each passing minute. Inside, Charles had retreated to the window, putting physical distance between himself and the stuffed rabbit that sat accusingly on his desk. His reflection in the glass showed a man struggling to maintain composure, a foreign experience for someone who prided himself on emotional control. "Even if what you're suggesting were true," he said finally, his back still to Margaret, "it changes nothing. I am Charles Dunham. I have been Charles Dunham for as long as I can remember." "Not always," Margaret said gently. "Once you were Anthony Whitman, my little boy." Charles turned sharply. "I was adopted as an infant. That's what my mother, what Elaine always told me. And you never questioned it? Never wondered why you have no memories before age 4? Why the nightmares of being lost kept coming?" Charles's eyes widened slightly, another tell. "How do you know about the nightmares?" Margaret's smile was sad, knowing. "Because a mother knows what haunts her child." For a moment, something flickered across Charles's face, a vulnerability quickly masked by anger. He jabbed the intercom button on his desk. "Vanessa, please escort Ms. Wilson out. We're done here." Margaret didn't move. "I don't want to disrupt your life, Anthony." "Don't call me that," Charles snapped, real emotion cracking through his corporate veneer. "But I've waited too long to walk away now," Margaret finished, still calm. "If you want proof, I have it. Birth certificate, DNA test, whatever you need." Charles laughed bitterly. "And what happens then? You sell your story to the tabloids? CEO discovered to be kidnapped child? Is that your retirement plan?" The accusation landed like a slap. Margaret flinched but held her ground. "I've kept your rabbit for 42 years, she said quietly. "I've celebrated your birthday alone with a cupcake and a candle every September 12th. I'm not here to hurt you." Before Charles could respond, the office door swung open. Vanessa stepped in without knocking, her smile tight and professional. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but your 10 o'clock is waiting, Charles." "I don't have a 10 o'clock, Charles replied, confusion momentarily displacing his anger. "The call with Tokyo. They rescheduled, remember?" Vanessa's eyes flicked meaningfully toward Margaret, her message clear. "I'm giving you an exit." Charles hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Ms. Wilson was just leaving." Margaret stood slowly, her dignity intact despite the dismissal. She reached for Marvin, but Charles was quicker, snatching the rabbit from the desk and holding it with unexpected gentleness. "I'll keep this," he said, his tone unreadable. Margaret nodded once, understanding the gesture for what it was, not a rejection, but a need for time. "My number is in the company directory. When you're ready to talk again." She left the office with her head high, feeling Vanessa's cold gaze on her back all the way to the elevator. Later that evening, Margaret sat at her small kitchen table in her Reseda apartment. The yellow glow of a single lamp illuminated a wooden box open before her, a repository of 4 decades of hope, grief, and waiting. From it, she removed a birth certificate for Anthony Eduardo Whitman, born September 12, 1979, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, to Margaret Rose Whitman and Eduardo Sousa, deceased. Beside the birth certificate lay a stack of birthday cards, 18 of them, written faithfully each year until what would have been Anthony's 18th birthday. Each contained the same message. "Wherever you are loved. I will never stop looking. Mom." With hands that had aged from decades of harsh cleaning chemicals, Margaret carefully withdrew a sealed envelope from the bottom of the box. The paper had yellowed with time, the address written in neat script to Anthony Whitman, with no destination. It was dated September 12, 1997, Anthony's 18th birthday. Margaret broke the seal for the first time, unfolding the letter she'd written but never been able to send. My dearest Anthony, today you are 18, legally a man, though in my heart, you will always be my little boy with chocolate ice cream on your chin and questions about why the sky is blue. If you're reading this, then somehow, against all odds, we found each other again. There's so much I want to tell you. About your father who loved the ocean and died before he could teach you to swim. About your first words, luz, Portuguese for light. About how you like to sleep with your arms stretched above your head, as if reaching for dreams. I don't know what your life has been like these past 14 years. I don't know what you've been told about where you came from. But I know this. You were never forgotten. Not for one day, not for 1 hour. I hope whoever raised you was kind. I hope they read you stories and checked for monsters under the bed. I hope they taught you to be honest and brave and to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Most of all, I hope they told you how much you were loved. Because you were, Anthony. You are. With every breath I take, if you're angry, at me, at the world, at what happened, that's okay. If you need time, or space, or if you decide you don't want me in your life, I will understand. Having you safe and well is enough for me. It always has been. But if you want to know me, I am here. I have always been here. Waiting. With love that never dimmed, your mother. Margaret carefully refolded the letter, her tears leaving fresh marks on the aged paper. Outside her window, the lights of Los Angeles twinkled in the distance, one of them perhaps illuminating the penthouse where her son, a stranger who called himself Charles, was confronting questions he'd buried his entire adult life. Margaret picked up her phone and made a decision. She would not wait any longer for fate to intervene. The world deserved to hear her story. Their story. She dialed the number for KTLA News, her heart pounding as the line connected. "News desk," a young voice answered. "My name is Margaret Whitman," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. 42 years ago, my son was taken from me. Today I found him, and I think people need to hear what happened." As she spoke, across town, Charles Dunham sat alone in his darkened living room, the stuffed rabbit Marvin clutched in his hands. On the coffee table, his laptop screen displayed a paused video, security footage from his office that day, capturing every word of his conversation with Margaret. And behind him, unnoticed on the mantel, a framed photograph of Elaine Dunham seemed to watch with cold, unblinking eyes. Dawn broke over Los Angeles, spilling gold across the Hollywood Hills and filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charles Dunham's penthouse. He hadn't slept. The leather couch beneath him had grown cold and uncomfortable hours ago, but he remained motionless, staring at the stuffed rabbit that sat on his glass coffee table, a tattered sentinel from a past he couldn't remember. His phone had been ringing incessantly since 6 a.m. Vanessa, the board members, his PR team, all frantically trying to reach him after the morning news broadcast. Charles had watched in stunned silence as Margaret Whitman told her story to a sympathetic reporter, her weathered face filling his 85-inch television screen with an authenticity that no media training could fake. "I recognized him instantly," she had said, her eyes brimming with tears that refused to fall. A mother knows her child, even after 42 years. The station had been careful, using phrases like alleges and claims, but the implication was clear. The reporter had done her research, producing photographs of young Anthony alongside current images of Charles, the same deep-set eyes, the same distinctive hairline, the same cleft in the chin. Charles ran his hands through his disheveled hair, his usually impeccable appearance abandoned. The remains of a bottle of scotch sat on the table next to a glass with a film of amber liquid dried at the bottom. For the first time in his adult life, Charles Dunham had no control over the narrative. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. "What?" His voice was rough, unfamiliar even to himself. "Charles, thank God." Vanessa's voice was tight with controlled panic. "We need to issue a statement immediately. The stock is already down 3 points in pre-market trading. I've drafted a denial and—" "I'll handle it," he interrupted, ending the call abruptly. Charles stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion and alcohol. He walked to his bedroom and opened the safe hidden behind an original Rothko, a gift from Elaine on his 30th birthday. Inside, beneath stock certificates and legal documents, lay a small leather-bound book he'd never shown anyone. It wasn't a diary exactly. More a collection of fragments, dreams, flashbacks, impressions that had haunted him since childhood. Things Elaine had dismissed as an overactive imagination whenever he'd tried to discuss them. A blue carousel horse with chipped paint. The smell of cotton candy mingled with sunscreen. A woman's voice singing "You Are My Sunshine" with a slight accent. The sensation of small fingers clutching a plastic fence. Waiting. The terrifying awareness of being utterly lost. Charles had stopped writing in the book years ago, after therapy and medication, and sheer force of will had pushed the fragments deep into his subconscious. But now they were surging back, triggered by a worn stuffed rabbit and a cleaning woman's quiet certainty. His phone rang again. This time it was his Aunt Sophia, Elaine's younger sister, and the only surviving member of the Dunham family besides himself. "You need to come over," Sophia said without preamble, her aristocratic voice brittle with age and cigarettes. Now. Sophia Dunham Winters lived in the family's original Bel Air mansion, a sprawling Spanish colonial that had appeared in architectural magazines and period films. At 78, she remained a formidable presence in Los Angeles society, known for her cutting wit and unwavering loyalty to family legacy. Charles found her on the rear terrace, overlooking manicured gardens that predated most of the surrounding mansions. She sat ramrod straight in a wicker chair, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the early hour, a cigarette smoldering between bejeweled fingers. "You've made quite a mess," Sophia said by way of greeting, gesturing for him to sit. Charles remained standing. "Did you know?" Sophia took a long drag of her cigarette, the smoke curling around her face like a veil. "About the media circus?" "Of course. It's all over the news." "About me," Charles clarified, his voice dangerously quiet. "About where I really came from." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, calculation, perhaps, or resignation. She tapped ash into a crystal dish and sighed. "Elaine should have handled this years ago," she said finally. "She always thought she was protecting you." The confirmation hit Charles like a physical blow. He sank into the chair opposite his aunt, legs suddenly unable to support him. "It's true then? I was taken? Kidnapped?" Sophia's laugh was harsh, without humor. Such dramatic terms. Elaine preferred rescued. "From what?" Charles demanded, leaning forward. "From whom?" "From a life of mediocrity," Sophia replied smoothly. "From a single mother who could barely afford rent, much less the education and opportunities Elaine gave you." Charles felt sick. The world he'd inhabited so confidently was dissolving around him, revealing a foundation built on lies. "That woman, Margaret, she's really my mother?" Sophia shrugged elegantly, a gesture that reduced 4 decades of deception to a minor social faux pas. "Biologically, yes, but Elaine was your mother in every way that mattered. She gave you everything." "She stole me," Charles whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. "She saw potential being wasted," Sophia corrected sharply. "She was at that tacky fair scouting locations for a charity event. She saw you, alone, crying. And then she saw that woman, distracted, talking to some man. Elaine always said it was like fate intervening." Charles remembered the security footage from his office the previous day. Margaret's voice saying, "I was only gone for a minute." The crushing guilt in her eyes even after 42 years. "She bought my silence with comfort," he repeated Margaret's words, understanding them now. "I was just a baby lost, and she wanted a son." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "She wanted an heir," she corrected coldly. "The distinction is important. Elaine needed someone to continue the Dunham legacy after her husband proved disappointing." Charles knew the story, or thought he had. Thomas Dunham, killed in a sailing accident when Charles was just an infant. Another lie, apparently. And no one ever questioned it? A wealthy woman suddenly appearing with a 4-year-old child? Sophia's smile was thin. Money smooths many complications, Charles, especially in 1983. False documentation, a convenient private adoption story, a few key people paid to look the other way. By the time you started kindergarten at Westlake Academy, you were thoroughly Charles Dunham, and Anthony Whitman had ceased to exist. Except he didn't, Charles said quietly. She never stopped looking. Something like pity crossed Sophia's face. Yes, well, persistence was her only virtue, it seems. Charles stood abruptly. You speak as if she's nothing. This woman raised me for 4 years, loved me, lost me, and spent her entire life looking for me while cleaning other people's houses. And now she's found you, Sophia observed coolly. How convenient, just as you've become one of the wealthiest men in California. I assume she'll want compensation for her suffering. She hasn't asked for anything, Charles shot back. Unlike the family that stole me, who expected me to dedicate my life to their legacy. Sophia's composure finally cracked. She slammed her cigarette into the ashtray with enough force to break it. Ungrateful child. Everything you are, everything you have, came from Elaine. That woman would have raised you in poverty, in obscurity. Look at her life, a cleaning woman. Is that what you would have preferred? Charles stared at his aunt, this stranger who had helped orchestrate the theft of his identity. What I would have preferred, he said slowly, each word deliberate, was the truth. And the chance to know my real mother. He turned to leave, then paused. Did Elaine ever regret it? Even once? Sophia's face hardened. Regret giving you the world? No, though she occasionally regretted your stubborn nature. That apparently you inherited from your birth mother. As Charles drove away from the mansion, his hands shaking on the steering wheel of his Bentley, his phone rang again. This time it was Ryan Chen, the systems engineer who had witnessed the Ferrari incident. Mr. Dunham, Ryan said tentatively, I have the DNA results you requested, between you and the employee in question. Charles pulled over onto the shoulder of Sunset Boulevard, luxury cars speeding past him in a blur. And 99.9% match for parent-child relationship, sir. There's no doubt. Margaret Wilson is your biological mother. The neighborhood of Reseda existed in a different universe from Bel Air, though they shared the same sprawling city. Here, modest single-story homes lined streets shaded by trees that had been planted when returning GIs built these neighborhoods in the 1950s. Window air conditioners hummed against the afternoon heat, and children's bicycles lay abandoned in driveways as families retreated indoors for dinner. Margaret's apartment complex sat on a corner lot. A 2-story stucco building painted a faded salmon color that had once been fashionable. Geraniums grew in plastic pots along the communal walkway, their vibrant red a testament to Margaret's careful tending despite the California drought. Charles parked his Bentley at the curb, immediately aware of how out of place the luxury vehicle looked on this modest street. He sat for a moment, engine off, gathering courage. In the passenger seat lay the DNA test results and Marvin the rabbit, incongruous companions on this journey into his past. An elderly man walking his dachshund slowed to stare at the luxury car, then shook his head and continued on. Charles realized he couldn't delay any longer without drawing more attention. He stepped out, the soft click of the Bentley's door a stark contrast to the rattling window units and distant sounds of a Spanish-language television show filtering through an open window. Apartment 6B was on the second floor, accessed by an exterior staircase with a wrought iron railing that had been painted and repainted so many times it had lost its original definition. Charles climbed slowly, his Italian leather shoes unusually loud on the concrete steps. He paused at the door, hand raised to knock. What would he say to this woman, this stranger who had given him life, lost him, and spent decades searching? No business negotiation, no corporate takeover had ever made Charles Dunham as nervous as this moment. Before he could knock, the door opened. Margaret stood in the doorway, still wearing the navy dress from their earlier meeting, though she'd replaced the cardigan with a light shawl against the evening chill. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of surprise. "I saw you from the window," she explained softly. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come to the door." Charles tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him. Instead, he extended his hand, offering the lab report wordlessly. Margaret took it, glancing at the medical letterhead, but made no move to open the envelope. "You didn't need to bring this," she said. "I already know what it says." "I needed to be sure," Charles managed, his voice rougher than he intended. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Please, come in." The apartment was small but immaculately kept. Faded furniture had been arranged to maximize the limited space, and family photos lined a bookshelf, most featuring Margaret alone or with people Charles didn't recognize. What struck him most was the sense of permanence. Unlike his minimalist penthouse designed by an interior decorator and changed every few years to keep up with trends, this space had been lived in, built over time, each object carrying history. "Would you like some tea?" Margaret asked, gesturing to a small kitchenette separated from the living area by a breakfast bar. "No, thank you." Charles remained standing awkwardly, still holding Marvin the rabbit. "I spoke with my aunt, with Sophia. She confirmed your story." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, as if a weight she had carried for decades had suddenly become lighter. "I didn't go to the media to hurt you," she said, motioning for him to sit on the sofa. "I just couldn't wait any longer, not after seeing you, knowing you were alive, successful." Charles sat cautiously on the edge of the worn sofa. "They've been calling all day. The press, the board, everyone wants a statement." "What will you tell them?" Margaret asked, settling into an armchair across from him, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. "I don't know," Charles admitted, the unfamiliar sensation of uncertainty making him restless. "The truth, I suppose. That I was taken. That I didn't know." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes intent on his face. "Anthony." "Charles," he corrected automatically, then winced at his own sharpness. "I'm sorry. It's just, that's who I am. Who I've been my whole life." "Of course," Margaret nodded, though the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "Charles, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. I didn't find you to disrupt your life or to gain anything. I just needed to know you were okay, that you were alive." The simplicity of her statement, the decades of pain behind it, hit Charles with unexpected force. This woman had spent most of her adult life wondering if her child was alive or dead, happy or suffering. Meanwhile, he had been climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating wealth, living a life constructed on a foundation of lies. "I don't remember you," he said finally, the admission costing him more than he anticipated. "I've tried since yesterday. I've tried to remember anything before Elaine, before the Dunhams, but there's nothing concrete, just fragments." Margaret's smile was gentle, tinged with sorrow. "You were only 4. It's normal not to remember much from that age." "I remember, Marvin," Charles said, looking down at the stuffed rabbit still clutched in his hand. "Not clearly, but feelings, attachments." Margaret nodded encouragingly. "You loved him, wouldn't go to sleep without him. When his ear tore off, you were inconsolable." Charles ran a finger over the mismatched ear, feeling the different texture of the fabric. "You fixed him with something different." "An old sock," Margaret confirmed, her voice catching. "It was all I had at the laundromat. You said he was still Marvin, just different now." The phrase unlocked something in Charles, a distant memory of his own voice, higher, with the slight lisp of early childhood. For a moment, he could almost smell laundry detergent, feel the rumble of industrial washing machines beneath his feet. Margaret watched him carefully, hope and fear battling in her expression. "There are other things you might remember. We lived in an apartment near UCLA. You loved the swings at the park on Veteran Avenue. Your favorite food was chocolate ice cream. You were afraid of the vacuum cleaner, said it was a monster that ate dirt." Charles shook his head. I'm sorry, it's not there. It's okay, Margaret assured him, though her disappointment was visible. You were so young. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, mother and son, strangers to each other despite their shared DNA. The weight of 42 lost years hung in the air, an invisible barrier neither knew how to breach. I saw the news report, Charles said finally. You didn't say who took me. No, Margaret agreed. That wasn't why I went public. I didn't want revenge, just acknowledgement. The chance to tell my story. Charles studied her face, the lines of age and hardship, but also the unmistakable kindness in her eyes. Eyes that, he now realized, matched his own. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words bursting from him. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That you spent your life wondering. That no one believed you. Margaret's composure finally broke. A single tear slid down her cheek, followed by another. I'm sorry too, she whispered. Sorry I couldn't protect you. That I let you out of my sight even for a minute. That I failed you as a mother. The raw guilt in her voice struck something fundamental in Charles. Before he could think, he moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her weathered hands in his. You didn't fail, he said fiercely. You were a victim too. Margaret looked down at their joined hands, her skin wrinkled and spotted with age, his tanned and manicured. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out to touch his face, her fingertips brushing his cheek with such gentleness it made his throat tighten. My boy, she whispered, more to herself than to him. My beautiful boy. Something cracked inside Charles, a wall built by years of expensive therapy, emotional detachment, and Elaine's careful conditioning. Without warning, tears filled his eyes, blurring his vision of this woman who had given him life, who had never stopped searching for him. The sob that escaped him was raw, almost childlike. Margaret didn't hesitate. She pulled him into her arms as naturally as if he were still 4 years old, holding him against her shoulder with surprising strength for her small frame. It's okay, she soothed, one hand stroking his hair. It's okay, mio figlio. I've got you now. Charles couldn't remember the last time anyone had held him like this, without agenda or expectation. He had no memory of being comforted as a child. Elaine Dunham had not believed in coddling. But here, in this modest apartment, in the arms of a cleaning woman who smelled faintly of laundry soap and drugstore perfume, Charles Dunham, powerful CEO, ruthless businessman, self-made billionaire, wept like the lost child he had once been. Neither noticed the shadowy figure watching from a car across the street, nor heard the soft click of a camera capturing their reunion through Margaret's uncurtained window. The sleek glass and steel law offices of Cavendish, Moore and Perkins occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown Los Angeles skyscraper, offering panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the largest conference room, tension hung thick in the air as Charles Dunham faced down his legal team, his PR consultants, and a visibly agitated Vanessa Pierce. This is corporate suicide, declared Eleanor Cavendish, the firm's senior partner, tapping manicured fingernails against a tabloid newspaper. The headline screamed, Billionaire CEO embraces cleaning lady mom, above a grainy photograph of Charles weeping in Margaret's arms. We need to issue an immediate denial, suggest mental health issues, anything to distance you from this situation. Charles stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid in his custom Tom Ford suit. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his voice remained steady as granite. The DNA test confirms it, he stated flatly. Margaret Wilson is my biological mother. I was not adopted as an infant as Elaine Dunham claimed. I was taken, kidnapped, from a county fair in 1983. The room erupted in controlled chaos, lawyers murmuring urgently to each other, the PR director frantically typing notes on her tablet, Vanessa staring at Charles with an expression that cycled between shock and calculation. Charles, Vanessa said, her voice honeyed with forced patience. Think about what you're saying. Elaine Dunham was a pillar of Los Angeles society, a philanthropist. You're suggesting she was a criminal. Not suggesting, Charles corrected coldly. Stating a fact. My aunt confirmed it yesterday. Eleanor Cavendish removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, going public with such a claim would destroy not only Elaine's legacy, but potentially your own. The company's stock has already dropped 12 points since that woman's television appearance. That woman, Charles said, each word precisely articulated, is my mother. And her name is Margaret. Silence fell across the conference room. The gathered professionals exchanged glances, clearly wondering if their normally rational client had lost his mind. Perhaps, offered James Moore, another partner, we could arrange a private financial settlement. Acknowledge the biological connection, but keep the unfortunate circumstances confidential. Charles's laugh was short and bitter. She hasn't asked for money, not once. Yet, muttered Vanessa, just loud enough to be heard. Charles turned to her, his gaze sharpening. Do you have something to contribute, Miss Pierce? Vanessa straightened, smoothing her impeccable silk blouse. Only concern for your welfare, Charles. This woman appears out of nowhere, makes extraordinary claims, and suddenly you're throwing away everything you've built? Everything Elaine built for you? Elaine didn't build anything for me, Charles replied, his voice dangerously quiet. She stole me from a mother who spent 4 decades looking for her child, while scrubbing toilets to make rent. Tell me, Vanessa, what kind of person does that? The conference room door burst open before Vanessa could answer. Ryan Chen, the systems engineer, rushed in clutching a tablet, oblivious to the tension he'd interrupted. Mr. Dunham, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this, he said, sliding the tablet across the polished table. HR received it 20 minutes ago. Charles picked up the device. It displayed a formal complaint form with Vanessa's name in the complainant field. The accusation: Margaret Wilson, cleaning staff, attempting to extort CEO Charles Dunham with fraudulent claims of familial relationship. Charles looked up slowly, his eyes finding Vanessa across the table. You filed this? When? Vanessa didn't flinch. Yesterday afternoon, before you received the DNA results. I was protecting you and the company from what was clearly a shakedown attempt. A shakedown, Charles repeated, his voice flat. From a woman who's worked faithfully for this company for 7 years without a single complaint, who continued cleaning offices at night while searching for her stolen child during the day. I couldn't have known, Vanessa began defensively. Couldn't you? Charles interrupted, his controlled facade finally cracking. Or did it just not fit your narrative, your plans? He turned to Ryan. Who else has seen this complaint? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. It was automatically copied to legal and security, and he hesitated. Given the sensitive nature, it triggered an alert to the LAPD Corporate Fraud Division. A muscle twitched in Charles's jaw. Get Margaret Wilson on the phone, now. As Ryan hurried out, Vanessa rose from her seat. Charles, you're not thinking clearly. Let me handle this. We can spin it, say it was a misunderstanding. You're fired, Miss Pierce. The words fell like an executioner's axe. Vanessa froze, color draining from her face. What? You heard me. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out. You can't. I've given you 5 years of my life. I've protected you, supported you. You filed a fraudulent complaint against my mother, Charles stated, emphasizing the last word. Be grateful I'm not pressing charges for defamation. The conference room door opened again as 2 security officers entered, their expressions professionally blank. Vanessa looked from them to Charles, reality finally sinking in. You'll regret this, she hissed, gathering her belongings with trembling hands. When she bleeds you dry, remember who tried to warn you. After she was escorted out, Charles turned back to his stunned legal team. I want a press conference, this afternoon, and I want Margaret Wilson there with me. Eleanor Cavendish looked horrified. Charles, please reconsider. At least let us prepare a statement, control the narrative. The narrative, Charles interrupted, has been controlled long enough. By Elaine, by you. by everyone except the person who matters most in this story. 3 hours later, the atrium of Dunham Industries headquarters had been transformed into a media staging area. Camera crews from every major network jostled for position. The air buzzed with speculation and the fluorescent lights gleamed off equipment and eager faces. Charles stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. Beside him, Margaret looked small and out of place in her best dress, the same navy one she'd worn to their previous meetings, now accessorized with a simple pearl pendant Charles had sent to her apartment that morning. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, watching his nervous movements. "We could still walk away. Handle it privately." Charles shook his head. "No more secrets. No more hiding." Margaret touched his arm gently. "I'm worried about what this will do to you. Your company, your reputation." Charles covered her hand with his own. "For 42 years, you searched for me without giving up. The least I can do is stand beside you now, whatever comes." A PR assistant signaled that it was time. Charles took a deep breath and guided Margaret toward the podium, his hand supportive at her elbow. Camera flashes exploded as they appeared, questions being shouted from all directions. Charles raised a hand for silence, and gradually the chaos subsided. He looked out at the sea of faces, journalists hungry for scandal, employees confused by the unfolding drama, executives worried about stock prices and quarterly reports. "My name," he began, his amplified voice steady, "is Charles Dunham. For 42 years I have lived with that identity, built a company under that name, and believed a story about my origins that I recently discovered was a lie." A murmur ran through the crowd. Beside him, Margaret stood straight, her dignity palpable despite her simple clothes and obvious nervousness. "In 1983, I was taken from my mother at a community fair. The woman who raised me, Elaine Dunham, did not adopt me legally as she claimed. She saw a child she wanted and took him, forever altering the course of 2 lives." The murmur grew louder. Camera flashes intensified. "The woman standing beside me is Margaret Wilson. For 42 years, she has worked as a cleaning woman in hospitals and office buildings across Los Angeles, never giving up hope of finding her son. Through an extraordinary coincidence involving the biometric security on my car, we discovered the truth. Margaret Wilson is my biological mother." Charles turned to look at Margaret, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "The strength it took to keep searching, to keep hoping after decades of disappointment, humbles me. The woman you mocked, whose labor you overlooked, whose presence in your buildings was invisible to you. This woman has taught me more about courage in 3 days than Elaine Dunham taught me in 40 years. He faced the cameras again, his expression resolute. "I am establishing the Anthony Whitman Foundation, named for the boy I once was, dedicated to helping find missing children and supporting the parents who search for them. The foundation will be funded by the sale of my Ferrari F8 Tributo, the car that, ironically, helped reunite me with my mother." Charles paused, then added with quiet intensity, "And to every person who has ever felt invisible, overlooked, or forgotten, your worth is not determined by your wealth or status. Some of the strongest people I have ever met clean floors and serve food and care for others without recognition. I see you now, and I thank you." The press conference exploded with questions, but Charles was already guiding Margaret back through the doorway, away from the clamoring voices and flashing cameras. 6 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, Charles pulled his aging Ford pickup truck, a recent purchase that had puzzled his social circle, into the parking lot of a nondescript building in East Los Angeles. Margaret sat beside him in the passenger seat, her face alight with excitement. "Are you ready?" Charles asked, cutting the engine. Margaret nodded, her eyes fixed on the single-story building that had once been a community center, but had stood empty for nearly a decade. Now, fresh paint brightened its facade, and new landscaping softened its institutional lines. Together, they walked toward the entrance, where a small crowd had gathered, mostly women of varying ages, some with children clinging to their hands or balanced on their hips. A simple sign hung above the door, freshly installed but designed with quiet dignity. "Casa Anthony, For parents, searching for their children. As Charles and Margaret approached, the waiting families parted to let them through, murmurs of recognition rippling through the group. Many reached out to touch Margaret's hand or shoulder as she passed, a gesture of solidarity from those who understood her journey all too well. At the doorway, Charles produced a key and handed it to his mother. "Your vision," he said simply. "You should open it." Margaret's weathered hand trembled slightly as she turned the key, pushing open the door to reveal a warm, welcoming space filled with comfortable furniture, computer stations, and walls lined with resources. Not a cold, institutional setting, but a place of hope. As the families filed in behind them, Charles heard his mother whisper words that would stay with him forever. Sometimes, the greatest gift isn't a car, but the chance to finally come home. Margaret Wilson's 42-year search reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in fancy cars or corporate towers, but in the courage to keep hoping when the world tells you to give up. How many of us would have the strength to continue searching after decades of disappointment? How many would clean floors by day while holding on to a shattered dream by night? Sometimes the most invisible people carry the most extraordinary stories within them. Charles Dunham discovered that the identity he built his life around was founded on lies, yet found the courage to embrace a painful truth rather than continue living in comfortable deception. Would you have the bravery to tear down everything you thought you knew about yourself? To stand before the world and acknowledge not just your biological truth, but the moral failing that created your privilege? In the end, the Ferrari that was meant to humiliate became the vehicle that brought healing to two lives broken by a single moment of selfishness 42 years ago. This story teaches us that redemption doesn't require wealth, it requires courage. Recognition doesn't demand status, it demands honesty. And sometimes the greatest journey home begins with a single moment of unexpected truth. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of human connection, and share with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to find your way back to what matters most.